All right, welcome to part 3. So we're going to be talking about auth in this video. So I'm at the documentation here, and we're just going to get this set up. The first thing we need to do is add this dependency to our YAML file, and this is actually for our server YAML file. So we'll look within list-d2 server, and we will go to our pub spec, and we'll just put it in our dependencies. And we'll just want to make sure that whatever version we're using matches up. So we will use this, and we will save that. And we have the Dart pub running, which is great. Okay, next we need to add this as a module. So we're going to go into our config generator. And right now there's not much in here, but we're going to essentially copy and paste this and just save that file. And then we're going to rerun our server generate function, which again, we're using this make file that just has some helpers in here. So this is going into the correct directory and running Serverpod generate with the watch flag. All right, so we've done that. We did the pub get kind of automatically, and we just did the generate. Okay, on the client side, we might have some of this already done. Oh no, not for the client side yet. So this is one of the small changes we need to make for client. I mentioned earlier there's not a lot that we do in the client app. A lot of it's auto-generated, but we do need to include this right here. So we'll just put this, and same thing, we want it to be that version. And on the Flutter side, and this we actually did, I think, in the very first, the most recent video. We were just getting some of our boilerplate out of the way, but in case you weren't following along, you'll want to make sure that you have Serverpod Auth shared and email. You'll see in here there's also the Google one and Apple. We're not going to worry about those, at least at this point of the video. We're only going to worry about email login, so we can ignore those. All right. All right, let's close our files, and we're going to go within the Flutter app, lib, source, feature, and we're going to make a new feature called Auth. And in here, let's start by making a screen. New folder called screens, and a new file called authscreen.dart. And we'll start this just as a stateless widget, and we'll just call it auth screen. Okay, now this we will start by creating a scaffold, and we'll give it an app bar that can just say app bar, give it a title that just says welcome. Right, I don't know why. Because this shouldn't be a const. There we go. And then for our body, let's just put a center, and in a child, we're going to put a button here. So let's just, for now, just do an elevated button. Pressed, nothing, and child text, and we'll just make it say login. Okay, and we'll go back to our main.dart inside Flutter. And instead of using this scaffold here for the home, we're just going to import in auth screen. And now we have this nice little login button, which doesn't do anything yet, but we have it. Okay, so I know I just made this button, and we put a lot of effort into making it, but we're actually going to get rid of it because Serverpod has a widget for this, so we can save a lot of the heavy lifting here. And it's just called sign in with email button. All right, and it takes a function on signed in, which we'll do something with. The other part of it is we need to assign a caller, and this is essentially a reference to our auth model. So our auth model, if you remember, if we go to our singletons, and specifically the API client, we can actually just reference this this client here. Specifically, it's auth module. So let's see if we can get access to that. So here we would use our singleton and API client dot client, then dot modules dot auth. So that's just a reference to the auth module, and this is the module we just installed with all its generated code. If you were to look at this, you would see it's a bunch of generated code within the client, but that's all we need to do, and let's just print something that says welcome. Okay, now going back to the server now, we're going to go and get that configured. So I'm going to the server.dart, and there's a couple more things we now need to put in here. So we need to configure auth. So in order to do that, we need to import in our auth module. So I'm just going to import Serverpod auth server module.dart, and I'm just going to cast it as auth so that we can just kind of keep it namespaced. And after all these, although the order doesn't really matter, we're going to create some code here. So auth.authconfig.set. So we're just configuring some auth settings right now. And we're going to use auth.authconfig. Now, what I'm sort of typing out, this is in the docs. If you go to the authentication, you will see somewhere down here, right here. So I'm not just like making this up and being like, I'm so smart, I know how to do this. This just from the docs here. So in fact, let's do what really I would do in the real world and copy and paste it. Okay, so what we need to do here is actually the way the built-in auth email works is whenever you sign up, it sends you a validation email. There's also a password reset option. Now, for the scope of this video, at least right now, maybe when we get towards the end, we can actually set something up for this. I don't want to go through all the work of setting up a SMTP server, something like SendGrid or Mailgun, to just send an email when, for a purpose of dev, I can actually just print out the validation code here. So I'm just going to actually print this for that one and this one. And just to kind of make this feel a little bit more like it's doing an API call, we're going to await a future.delayed with a duration of 500 milliseconds. Because really this will be some kind of future call when you do it in the real world. And then we need to, I believe, this function, if we hover over it, it's expecting to return a bool, so we're just going to return true. The reason you might want to return false is maybe it's an invalid email when you've checked, and within here you have access to the actual email address that you would use. So we're just going to return true because this is really just for dev purposes so far. Okay, great. So we have that set up. And let's restart our server because we did make some changes to our server-side code. And we just probably need to do a green. Oh, here we go. We have an error here. I've seen this before, and it's when there is a mismatch on versions, which could be the case. So let's just look at all of our. We're using 101, 101, 101. Let's go to our pub spec for the client. Looks right. And our pub spec for the server. Oh, it's all using 101. Okay, let's just do a. Let's go into the server and do a FEM, or sorry, a Dart pub get. No Flutter here. And let's just go back and run make server run. There we go. So something with, I think when VS Code automatically installed it, maybe it did it incorrectly, I don't know, but that seemed to have solved it. Okay, so let's go back to our Flutter app. So let's click sign in with email, and you'll see it brings us a little pop-up up, and I could log in if I had an account, but I do not. Or I can go and, of course, create the account. Now, there's one other, big missing piece right now is we don't have, although we installed the library, we don't really have a database table right now to store our user data. So let's figure that out now. Now, in order to do this, you will need some type of way to access PSQL, Postgres SQL. You could just do that during the commit. You could just do that with the command line, which is fine. But there are some good tools, and I'm going to do one that's built into VS Code. So if I go to my extensions, just to show you the ones I have installed, and I'll just search for Postgres. And can I filter by installed? I believe so. Labeled Postgres. Okay, so I've installed this thing called SQL Tools, which is a driver for Postgres in VS Code. And I've also installed something called SQL Tools. So I've installed both of these. They're by the same developer. Basically, this is the management tool for SQL, and you know, if you're using MySQL, I'm sure there's an equivalent for that. But of course, Serverpod uses Postgres, so we don't have to worry about that. So I've installed both of these things here. And what this lets me do is I can go to SQL Tools, and I can create a new connection. So let's add that connection. We're going to choose Postgres, and we'll just call this listy2. And we need to put in some settings here. So if I actually go to the development.yaml, we can see by going on here to the database. And we know that it's going to be on localhost. However, it's not the default Postgres port. The name of it is just called listy2, and the user is Postgres. Now for password, we want to save. We're just going to use the save as plain text in settings. And if we go to our passwords file, we search down here into development and database, this is the password. So we're going to go and let's just click test connection, successfully connected, great, and I'll go save connection. So within this tab here, this is the extensions tab, I now have this connection, and I can go and click connect. And this is essentially a kind of like an interactive terminal that you can interact with. However, it's not a terminal per se, it is just a VS Code panel, like a text editing panel. So you know, I can write you know, select star from whatever and execute these things. So another thing I can look at is I can kind of pivot this down and see within here the actual tables. So there's a bunch of these are kind of like the Serverpod built-in ones, which is good. So let's see if there's one we can. There's probably nothing in any of these yet, and in fact you can also click this little plus button here and it'll actually open up kind of like an actual like table of the data, but there's no data. I think this is really just the schema right now because we haven't done any database stuff yet. So what we need to do is actually generate the table for our users. Now because this is a module that we installed, we can actually go to authentication, I believe, and I'm looking for installing the auth module, app setup, session manager. It might be on a different page. Let's just go to modules maybe. Yeah, here we go. So within the modules section, underneath database setup, there is something you can click here. And this is actually the generation code for this. So this will create the stuff for email, table called Serverpod email auth, Serverpod email create request, etc., etc. And we can just copy this. I like to usually open these in the raw mode, so I can just easily go Command A, Command C. And we're going to paste this code here. And we're just going to click Run on Active Connection. And there we go. And down here you can kind of see all the queries that ran. But now if we refresh this right here and open up our tables, we should see, let's close this. Let's click refresh again. Tables, Serverpod, email, here we go, email auth and stuff like that. So we can actually look at the data in here. Again, no data, it's really just the schema setup, but it has an ID, a user ID, an email, and a hash. Awesome. So we can close this. We don't have to worry about saving it. And we can close this, and we can close a whole bunch of things. Let's close everything. Okay, so now that we have that database, we should be good. So let's go here, and we're going to sign in with email. We don't have an account yet, so I'm going to make it. and go create account. All right, now the question is, did it work? Because we don't really have any logic here being like, you know, anything. And actually, I happen to know this definitely didn't work yet. There's something missing because we should have got a prompt, and we should have had something here printing, you know, printing that that we with that code. So let's take a look at what could be going on here. If we go to our singletons and look at the API client, I remember we set this up, but we kind of commented out because we didn't have the auth module yet. So let's put that back. And I think that is our issue. Now we're going to have to do a green arrow reload because the singleton code won't rerun again because it only happens on startup. And sometimes it's being a little nitpicky right now. I wonder what that's about. This does occasionally happen. Maybe something fatal happened. Yeah, unable to establish connection on channel. So we're just gonna close this and we are going to rebuild. All right, we've rebuilt now. So let's try this out. Sign in with email. Okay, we'll click create account. And now it's asking me for this validation code. So just as a reminder, in our server.dart, down here is where we would do we have to write our own code to actually go and send the email out. But we're not doing that for the purpose of this. We're just printing it out. So if I actually go to my console, I'll see I have this nice code right here. And we'll paste that in and click sign in. Okay, great. So now I am signed in, although there's really no logic in our app right now to handle whether someone signed in or out and all that kind of stuff. So let's do that next. Okay. So in order to handle this, what I want to build is something to sort of manage the user's session globally throughout the app. And one of the reasons really that we installed Riverpod to do that, which is a great state management framework. So we're going to go to this and we're going to open up our lib source, and inside core we're going to go into providers and we're going to make a new file called session provider.dart. Alright, if you haven't used Riverpod before, I am excited to show you a bit about it. So we're going to be creating something called a session provider, and it's going to extend something called state notifier. And that's, you'll see it imported something from Riverpod right there. And I'm just going to put bool in here for now just to get this out of the way. Basically what this refers to is what the data type of the state is that we'll be managing. So if this was only managing whether the user's logged in or logged out, bool would be fine. However, we're going to want to track more things, and we'll get to that in a bit. So what I want to do here is essentially create the constructor for session provider, and what needs to happen is we have to sort of set an initial state of this in the super. So I'm just for now going to just do false because we're going to be changing that anyways. And that's basically us setting up you know, the most basic session state notifier ever. But in order to access this, we don't actually work with the class itself. We want a version of session provider, this time without the capital. It's not a class. And we're going to instantiate it by going state notifier provider. And we'll just get rid of that. And we need to tell it what type of, or what the class is of the provider, as well as what the data type is. And in this case, for now, bool. Then we create its constructor. And within its constructor, you actually have something called ref, which we're not going to worry about at this moment. And we want to construct the session provider. And I don't need that there. Okay, now something else I like to do in these is actually create something called ref. And ref is Riverpod's ref object. I don't even really know how to explain it, but it's how you essentially interact with providers and how other providers can communicate with themselves. So we're actually going to make this the first parameter, a required parameter. And you'll see now I'm getting an error here, and we're just going to pass in that same ref that's here. So let's just put a comma there to make it clean. Secondly, what we can also do is set its initial state when we construct this. So I will just simply do that by calling it, and this will have to be of type bool, and we'll just call it initial. And instead of passing in false here, we're going to pass in initial right there. And then here we'd actually have, this is where we would actually set the initial. And this allows us to put some logic in here for whatever reason. And let's just do false. All right. Okay, some of the things we want to do. So within the session provider, we're going to be accessing the session manager and the client of our API client quite often. So I'm actually going to make references to them here just to make it easier so we're not duplicating that singleton pattern a lot. So we're going to just create this singleton API client dot session manager. And we're also going to make one called API client, and we just called it client there. In fact, we can just call it client here. That's fine. So now we'll be able to, within this class, access the session manager and the client really easily without having to duplicate, this tedious code a bunch of times. Okay, so what we can also do in the constructor is actually run some code when this initializes for the first time. And it will only ever be initialized once because it is, in this case, technically also a singleton. And we're going to just create an init function, and we might do some stuff in here to do init things. All that is good. Okay, so what do we actually need to do now? So just tracking the bool would be fine again if this was just meant to track whether they're logged in, logged out, but I want to have reference to the actual user information and various other things. So we're going to create a class that we're going to be managing its state for. So again, inside lib feature core models, we're going to make something called session. And this is where freeze is going to come in handy for us. Now, freeze might be a little bit of overkill for this, but I don't mind using a bit of overkill simply because if this was going to be the starting, me starting just an application for something much bigger, I do want to use all the bells and whistles that make sense for a larger project. So with freezed, first of all, we can declare something as freezed, annotate it, and we have to import in this object here, this file, and we're going to make a class called session. Okay, and it's going to essentially inherit this generated class that we're not going to make ourselves, but freeze is going to make for us, called session, like that. And we need to just have a constructor, so we'll have that, and then we create a factory, and this is essentially how we define what parameters the session model will have. So we're going to have something called user info, and hopefully I can import this. So user info is part of Serverpod, and if I import in our client correctly, okay, it's still not, oh, right, because let's see two. There we go. User info, okay, so we're not getting that yet. I'll figure out why in a minute, but we're going to want to have access to a user. And we essentially just go underscore session. So it's a bit of boilerplate stuff, but there will be some handiness in here. Then what we can do is we can actually create a getter on this that's going to return a bool called is authenticated. And we're just going to assume that as long as the user info, the user itself, is not null, we are logged in. All right, so we have a bunch of things. They're mad at us. I'm trying to figure out why. Oh, you know why? I probably need this file. There it is. So actually, this I don't need. It's this one right here. This module, the auth client module, which is a bunch of generated code, has the user info in it. And if we look at user info, it has things like an ID, a username, a full name, email. And this is the stuff we want to keep track of. If we want to show them their name and stuff, we want to have access to that. Okay, so I'm getting all these lovely errors, and that's because it's trying to import, this model that doesn't exist yet. So two things we have to do. One of them, we have to say that this file is actually part of another file, session.freezed.dart, which this file will get generated, and then it will be able to understand where this is coming from. Now, in order to generate this, I already kind of put this code over, but we're going to run this build runner code that runs generation. Now, if you look at the freeze docs, there's a couple other steps here, and one of them is in our YAML file for Flutter. We need to install the build runner. So that will be a dev dependency. So we're just going to put it down here, and we're just going to build runner. And at the time of this recording, the current version is 2.4.4. And let's just do this manually because we had that problem before. So let's go back a directory, back a directory, back a directory, back a directory, and we're just going to run we're going to run flutter pub get, and that will get our build runner going. Then the other thing we have to do is inside Flutter itself, inside the YAML file, we want to go generate true. And we shouldn't have to run pubget again for that, because that's just a configuration. Okay, so back to that make file I was showing you. So this is essentially the code we need to run within our Flutter directory. So I'm going to just run this. Okay, let's see if it it's still going. It's still going. Okay, cool. So let's just see. So you'll see here it actually generated another file, session.freeze.dart. I noticed recently that VS Code, and I'm not sure if it's just doing it on purpose because it's a freezed file or it's being ignored, but it doesn't actually show up here, which is why I opened it in here. But we do have that file now, and we can look at it, and this is the freezed file. So again, ugly kind of code, but you're never supposed to touch it. You know, do not modify by hand because it'll get wiped when you make another change. We also have these errors here, and it's just because we're importing things that are kind of like not part of this project per se, even though it is. So we can just go like this and go ignore for this file, and then it at least looks prettier, and we don't get these warnings. Okay, so now we have the session, meaning let's go back here, and instead of using a bool, we are going to use session. So there it just imported in the model session, and now our initial state can't be a type bool. Down here, this has to change the session, and then here, we're actually just going to pass in a session. And because session has, there's no required things, this will be null, which is kind of what we want when we start up. We want, to assume they're not logged in. Excellent. So now we have a session provider we can work with. So back over to our login auth screen. And what we can do now is we can essentially talk to Riverpod when the sign-in happens and essentially log them in. So let's create a method for that. Okay, we're going to just call this update user, and it will be an async function. And what we can do is we can get whoever the logged in user is, session manager, this right here. Oh, sorry, I was doing this wrong. We can get the user by going final user equals session manager dot is signed in, or just wait, signed in user. And this will return a user. See, user info, and it's nullable, so this seems to conform really well. Then what we can do is we can go state equals, and this is where this is just how we can update the this state. We will go state.copyWith, and we want to go user equals user, and that conforms to it because even if this ends up being null, it'll just set it to null. So this copyWith method is something that we didn't write this. This is just one of the great things about freeze, that it automatically makes copyWith methods as well as a whole bunch of other things. So yeah, we were able to just go state.copywith. Um, the way Riverpod works is you can never actually edit whatever's in the state. You're always replacing the state and updating it. All right, so then what we can do in our auth screen is when we sign in, we would just essentially call this update user. But how do we get access to this? Well, this is where Riverpod's consumer comes into place. So we're going to do this in one way first, and then we're actually going to make this way better. But we can just wrap this in a builder, wrap with builder, and instead of builder, we're going to use consumer. And consumer is a Riverpod widget, or it's really a builder widget from Riverpod, and it takes 3 parameters instead of the default just context. The second is ref, and the third is child, which we're not going to be using, so we'll just do the empty this little underbar here. So ref, this is the thing that we love. This is how we can talk to a provider. So what we can do here is go ref.read, and we want to pass in the name of the provider. In this case, it's session provider, and we're talking about its notifier, because we're not actually, if we were just doing, just to kind of show what this is, final test equals this. This variable is actually going to be the session, right? Which is what the state of this is. But we don't really want to interact with this session directly. We want to interact with the provider, so that we have all these methods and stuff. So we would actually go and do .notifier. And you'll see this now changes to the session provider itself. So within here now, we can go and call that update user function. And this doesn't return anything. You'll see it's just dynamic, cool. I was just showing that to explain how this works. So all we really have to do is run that, and we should get the user. So let's, just for the purposes of now, let me wrap this in a column. And we're just going to make its main axis size .min, so it doesn't try and take up all the room. And we're going to go, and this is just for example purposes, I'll be deleting this. We're going to make something called user, and it's going to be equal to ref.watch. Oh, we don't have access to ref this high up. Where did we do this? We have our consumer here, so user equals ref.watch. And here we want to watch just the session provider, not the notifier, but the provider itself. And in here now, we can go if user does not equal null, because again, this is that user data as part of our we need to now go .user, and then that's the nullable user info. So if user does not equal null, we can put some text here and just say, hello, I am logged in. And now we'll go back and view this. Now I'm going to just do a refresh because we added this whole provider's logic. And we actually now have to sign in. I have an account. And hopefully I remember my password that I used. There we go. Hello, I am logged in. And of course, we can, within here, actually go user dot full name, for instance. Although I don't think we set a full name. So do we have a username? User dot, yeah, username. Hello, I am logged in. Tyler Savory. Very cool. Okay, so yeah, we're able to do this. Now, let me just do a green arrow refresh and kind of simulate like a startup. And you're seeing I'm not signed in. Technically, I am. The Serverpod is dealing with all the logic for storing tokens and all that kind of stuff, sessions and all that. The reason we're not logged in, though, is simply because we are just, on startup, we're just putting in this session object here. And that's all fine. But what we want to actually do on init is call this update user function. Because what it's going to do is going to look at the Serverpod session manager and the signed in user and set it. So if we actually just run this update user on init and do a green arrow refresh, we see we are still logged in. So that was just we need to do a little bit of work to kind of be like, hey, we're logged in terms of the provider. All right, so we can get rid of this. One thing I want to explain is the difference between watch and read. Read generally you would use, especially when working with a notifier. You never want to watch a notifier. There's no need to. It would probably just lead to memory leaks. This is when I'm, activating something, as a one-off call. I don't want to keep watching it. I'm just doing it. Whereas watch is something within your UI, within a consumer widget. You can basically be like, hey, I am watching this. And this essentially allows us not to use things like set state throughout our app, because anything below this or anything that actually like impacts this user will get rebuilt when a change happens. And the way a change happens is anytime this state changes. So you kind of think of this as similar as like, you know, running something like set state within here, and it will do the rebuild, but it's a lot cleaner. We're not, you know, doing stateful widgets. That's what we're doing. So let's just get rid of these things, and I can get rid of this column now. Okay, so before we get too far ahead of ourselves, I want to put in a little more housekeeping here, because we're going to see this pattern a lot, where we're, you know, having to wrap everything in consumer so we can get access to state, to watch things, to work with notifiers, all that kind of stuff. This is just a practice that I personally like to do. And we'll start with the simpler one. And what we're going to do is actually in core make a new file called base component.dart. And we'll start by making this a stateless widget, base component. But instead of extending stateless widget, Riverpod also has something called a consumer widget. And a consumer widget is basically their version of a stateless widget. And the build function for it, the only difference is within here, we actually have access to ref. So we're going to do this. Yeah, we can just return placeholder. That's fine for now. And now, anytime we're building components with, you know, stateless widgets, we'll actually use this base component. And of course, we could just decide, let's just use the consumer widget. You know, we'll extend those, all fine. But there's a reason why I want to do it this way and have this shim, because we might want to add some extra functionality for our own needs and not have to refactor everything and just do it in one spot. So we have that, and we'll make use of this in a bit. It might not make sense now. What will make more sense is right here. We're going to make something called base screen.dart. And this will be a similar sort of thing. So in this file, right now this is just a basic stateless widget. But we're going to now make all of our screens extend something called base screen. So let's build that, and we'll start again, base screen. And it is also going to have extend the consumer widget like we did before. And then this is where it's going to get a little bit fancy, because all of our screens are going to, we're going to want to use scaffolds, right? And I don't really want to have, throughout our project, a million scaffold. Writing out scaffolds is kind of annoying. So we're actually going to return the scaffold here. Okay? Now, what we're going to do is make a function. So we have build, but we're going to make a function that returns a widget called body. And it's going to get access to the build context, call it context, and the widget ref, called ref. And here, okay, so essentially what we're going to do, and this will probably make a lot more sense when I have all the, you know, the code written here, but we're going to have this body function. By default, it's just going to return a size box. Within our build function, what we're going to do is actually, within the body, we are going to return our own body here. And we're going to pass our context and the ref. Now, ref we do need to get from here, widget ref. And that's simply because we're using this consumer widget and not just a standard, you know, Flutter stateless widget. Just some other cool helpers that I like to have, and we're going to also have the ability to, on these screens, just set an app bar, and similarly we can go app bar and actually pass in this function called app bar. And maybe we also want to have, like, you know, the option to put a bottom navigation bar or a floating action button, so I'm going to create those right here. And in order to do that, we essentially just have to go floating action button, and context ref. And then bottom navigation bar, context and ref. So we're just going to be returning a scaffold from here in our build function. And we'll be able to, in the components that we inherit base screen with, be able to essentially set those up. So let's just see how that could work. So let's go to our auth screen, and what I'm going to do is just I'm just going to call this auth screen old, for instance, and we'll actually just do this from scratch. So I'm going to create something now again called auth screen, and actually it's usually quicker just to do a stateless widget auth screen, and we're going to extend our base screen. And within here, in our build, we're no longer going to do our build function. We are going to create a body function, which will take widget ref. Now it seems like this didn't actually import properly. There we go. So now anything within this body will automatically now be within here, within the scaffold, etc., etc. So instead, we will return basically the same code we had here, the center widget, within our body, not our build function. So we'll do that, and I'm just going to, now that we've gotten what we needed, this. So now that this just makes it easier, we already have access to ref. You know, we don't have to wrap things in consumer widgets and so on and so forth. Let's see if it worked, and there we have it. So another thing we could do is put in an app bar. In order to do that, we just override the app bar function. So app bar, and this is just overriding basically this app bar here, which will get called here. So by default, it returns null, which is acceptable in a for an app bar, and we might want to just return our own app bar. Give it a title of text welcome. So these are just handy, you know, good DX developer experience things that I like. So we have that there, and of course it's an app bar, so we could also have some actions. You know, we could have an icon button here, doing whatever. Icons.abc, sure, and you'll see you get the little guy up there, but we don't need that. Okay, wicked. All right, we're almost through auth. There's just a couple other nitpicky things we need to do. For instance, when you sign in, we probably don't want to be showing this button anymore. So let's figure that out. So we have this auth screen. Let's create another screen, and we will just put this within. I'm going to make a new folder here, just called nav, and inside here, make a new folder called screens, and inside here we're just gonna, I like to use the word dashboard generally when it's like you're in the part of the app after the authentication, and we're just gonna call this dashboard container.dart, and for now we will make this a we will also extend the base screen, and we just have to make sure we change this to body, otherwise we're gonna lose that scaffold because it's gonna override it. And then widget ref. And here, let's just return maybe some text saying welcome, really enthusiastically, and we'll put it in a center. And I realize I spelled this wrong, so let's fix that. Dashboard screen. Okay, great. So what I also want to do is, and actually, I'm going to move this just right into nav, because in the future, this might not actually be a screen. It might be something that includes, you know, a tab bar or something like that. So I'm actually going to rename this to dashboard container. And it is a screen right now. That might change. We'll see. What I also want to have is something called app container. And this will essentially be, this one won't be a screen, which is kind of what I was getting at with the dashboard. We're going to just make a stateless widget called app container. And we are going to extend base component, not base screen, simply so that we have access to widget ref. And there we go, widget ref, make it say ref. And right here is where the magic is going to happen. So what we're going to do in our main.dart, right now we're just saying we're going to go to the auth screen. We're actually going to use app container as kind of like our home screen for now. And our app container is going to essentially go ref.watch. So we're going to be watching the session provider dot is authenticated. Remember, this is just that helper function we made, so we don't have to go if the user is not null and da-da-da. It's just simple, easy way to do it. So we're going to say if they're authenticated, we're going to return dashboard container. If they're not authenticated, we are going to return auth screen. and save that and save that. Get a little comma there. And there we go. We have welcome. Okay, let's just find a way to be able to log out. So let's go to our, and this will be probably temporary because we're going to actually put this somewhere else. But for now, we'll have this welcome. Let's put it in a column. Main axis size dot min. And under here, let's just do a text button maybe. And its text will say log out, just so we can test this whole flow. Because right now you can't log out of the app. Okay, let's go back to our session provider. And within here, we're going to make a new function called logout. All right, then this we are just going to await our session manager, which is the Serverpod session manager, and we are just going to go and run this function called sign out, and that will work. That will sign them out. But we also have to remember that we need to update the state of our session provider to be like, hey, this person's not logged out. And we could simply just kind of go, state equals state.copywith, and go user and null. Like that would work no problem. The problem is like, what if something went wrong with this? I like to just rely on, whatever's in our session manager. And in order to do that, all we really have to do is run this update user function again, right? Because this will go and get the current user and set it. So let's do that. And now if we click log out, it doesn't seem to do anything. And why would that be? Well, astute viewers will notice we did not hook it up to anything. So here we go, ref.read, session provider, and in this case notifier, because we're calling a function of the provider, and we want to go log out. And there we go, we're logged out. And if we even just refresh the app, we are going to be fully logged out. Sign in, I have an account. There we go. All right, we basically are done Auth now in its most basic form. Now, just to be clear, although the email stuff is great and will work for most use cases, there is built right into Serverpod the ability to sign in with Gmail, with Google, and also with Apple sign-in. So that's just some really nice stuff. Oh, they also have Firebase sign-in. I forgot about that too. So you can hook this up with Firebase, and then you can get any kind of login methods that Firebase supports. So it's really good. It also does allow you to create your own and hook it in and stuff, but that is far out of scope of what we're trying to do today. We are good with email login. All right, in the next one, we're going to actually start setting up our app. Auth, although complex, it's out of the way now. We're going to be dealing with now creating some models and some endpoints, and really I think seeing the true power of Serverpod.